Counter-Narrative News brings you daily news today on Wednesday the 22nd of March 2023. First, going to Somalia, the Somali Health Ministry, along with the World Health Organization and the children's body at the United Nations, UNICEF, has published a report in which it said last year there were 43,000 child deaths due to drought in the country, mostly in the southern and southern central regions. Now, Somalia was basically manipulated into a internal conflict at the behest and the interests of Western imperialism, destroying the remnants of the socialist state that saw Somalia's kind of golden era in the contemporary period. And it's still been basically enforced with a form of underdevelopment, to quote Walter Rodney, and enforced kind of conflict, division and trauma, because it's not just a narrow problem of drought and climate change, because drought and climate change can be pushed back with correct planning and water capture and irrigation and other strategies in terms of growing food and water for animal husbandry, etc. None of that is possible in Somalia because of the aforementioned conditions and reasons. And all of this leads to the devastation of largely rural communities dependent on their animals for especially milk for their babies and other things like that, and meat and food. And this creates contributes to the greater migration flows out of East Africa through the migration route through Yemen and Saudi Arabia, and also the other one through Libya, both of which are horrific routes in which there's a lot of abduction, rape, torture and other oppressions. Going to Syria, Israel has for the second time this month bombed an airport in Aleppo. Now, things are proceeding perfectly there, because you have Israel bombing Iranian presence, etc. in Syria, Russia pushing out the Iranian presence in coordination with leading NATO states, not least USA's occupation of Syria and Turkey's occupation of Syria as well. And then you have the Chinese pushing a normalization project de facto in the region through their brokered China-Iranian deal. Syria's been dragged into far away from any radical postures for Syrian independence and Arab independence that it may have had a long time ago. It's been moved right away from that, dragged into pro-colonial capitalist interests and agendas in the region. Going over to Ethiopia, the TPLF of the ruling party of the Tigray region has seen its terrorist label being removed by Addis Ababa, which is a precondition to the rapprochement now going on between the centre state and the Tigray region. Ethiopia and Eritrea, both parties to the violent conflict over there, have both been complaining against US Secretary of State Blinken's comments that, quote-unquote, all parties were guilty of war crimes. Now, up to 600,000 people have been killed in that war. Is this the way that oppressed people of the global south should see antagonism, the conflicts being resolved? That Tigray, yes, they conducted violent actions that were unacceptable, but is the response then a sectarian ethnic war in which leads to 600,000 deaths? And in 600,000 deaths, you don't think combatants on both sides will be conducting abuses against civilians? Of course they will. This has got nothing to do with anti-imperialism. It's got nothing to do with the rights of oppressed global south people in Africa, East Africa or anywhere else. It's got everything to do with this new whitewashing and recycling of toxic, sectarian, nationalistic, political approaches as somehow good. It's not. It's unacceptable. It's not appropriate. It's not in line with the best interests of the global south, working class, peasantry, oppressed masses. And finally, going over to another story, people will probably find the strange development of far-right activists claiming that they're anti-war in relation to the Russian decision to enter its colonial war of invasion, occupation, annexation. Now, the far-right and right-wing toxic nationalist elements have always been involved in anti-war movements, but they were in the context, for example, when Serbia was bombed by NATO in 1999. Serbia was a small nation. NATO is the biggest military alliance, oppressive military alliance in the world. So in that context, You have Serbian far-right nationalists allying with other global far-right nationalists in defending, quote-unquote, defending. So can a nation be defended by racists and the far-right? Of course it can't. But they posture it as defending Serbia against NATO. But now you have a big superpower state, that's Russia, conducting an illegal conflict against a much smaller neighbor, Ukraine. So what you have is the far-right posturing as anti-war, but they're not. They're pro a neocon war. They're pro a supremacist, racist, right-wing nationalist war in the form of the Russian actions. So people should stay very vigilant and reject them and eject this whole fascist collaborating, fascist infiltrating racket that we see. All the best.